Hey everyone, welcome to Mythology Explained. In today's video, we are going to discuss 9 of the most powerful giants in Norse mythology, especially those who contribute to defeating the gods and destroying the world during the fire and flood of Ragnarok, the great age-ending conflict that looms near in the mythic future. Alright, let's get into it. Starting off our list is Ymir. To speak of Ymir is to speak of the beginning of the universe, for he drew breath before any of the gods. First, there was only Ginnungagap, the great void. In it, 2 realms emerged, Niflheim, a world of ice in the north, and Muspelheim, a world of fire in the south. The northern cold of Niflheim spread into the heart of Ginnungagap, and the heat of Muspelheim emanated from the south. Fire and frost met. Droplets of water formed, and in these droplets there was a quickening. Ymir, whom the giants called Aurgelmir, was given form and life. He was the very first giant, and all the giants who dwell in Jotunheim, the realm of the giants, are his descendants. Later, Ymir began to sweat profusely in his sleep, a sweat of procreation. 2 giants, one male and one female, grew underneath his left arm, and his legs came together, coupling to produce a second son. Another being emerged, Aurgelmir, the cosmic cow. 4 rivers of milk flowed from her udders, and it was from these rivers that Ymir drank and nourished himself. Though Aurgelmir provided sustenance, it was she who unearthed the sire of Ymir's doom. She subsisted on salty blocks of ice, and her incessant licking eventually thawed out and freed Buri, the first god. He sired a son, Bor, who took the giantess Besla as his wife, and they, in turn, had 3 sons, Odin, Vili, and Ve, who attacked Ymir, killing him, then tearing apart his body into the material from which they made the world. At number 2 is Hrungnir. Hrungnir makes this list for his prodigious strength. He's said to be the strongest giant in all of Norse mythology, so it's fitting that he and Thor, the strongest of the gods, faced each other in a duel to the death. Thor launches his hammer, and Hrungnir launches his massive whetstone. Both weapons collide mid-flight. The whetstone breaks in 2, half of it lodging in Thor's skull, where it remained permanently, and half of it falling to earth, where it became the source of every whetstone that would come after. Thor's hammer, being the most powerful weapon in Norse mythology, wasn't so much as scratched and wasn't knocked off course. It struck the middle of Hrungnir's head, shattering his skull and killing him instantly. Up next we have Skrymir. Unlike many of his brethren, the source of Skrymir's power isn't his strength, but his mastery of the magical arts. Thor and Loki encounter him when they go on an adventure to Giantland. This myth plays out like some malicious magician using his tricks to deceive, dismay, and dispirit a child, in which Skrymir is the magician and Thor is the child. The 2 of them first meet in the morning, and to Thor's surprise, what he thought was a great hall in which he and his group took shelter was actually one of Skrymir's huge gauntlets. The colossal giant suggested that they travel together and combine their provisions, an idea to which Thor and his party are amenable. When they make camp for the night, Skrymir, in the same instant, tosses the provision bag to Thor and says that he's going to bed. To Thor's surprise, he can't untie any of the knots and access the food. This enrages him, so he tries to kill the giant with his hammer on 3 separate occasions throughout the night. But each blow, to Thor's chagrin, inflicts absolutely no damage, managing only to lightly rouse Skrymir from sleep, with him asking mildly each time if some light object, like a leaf or an acorn, had fallen on him. The giant departs the next morning, and Thor comes to the fortress of Utgarda Loki, another giant, where he is subjected to a series of challenges, all of which he fails. The next morning, Utgarda Loki comes by to see his visitors off, and it is here that he reveals to Thor that he is Skrymir, the giant with whom he traveled just before coming to the fortress. and that everything he experienced in the last day has been the product of illusion and trickery. He explains that Thor couldn't untie the provision bag because it was fastened with steel wire, that Thor's hammer blows in the middle of the night did no damage because he shielded himself with a mountain each time, that Thor couldn't finish his drink because it was connected to the ocean, that Thor couldn't lift a cat because it was the world serpent in disguise, and that Thor couldn't win a wrestling match against an old woman because she was the personification of old age, whom no man defeats. And with that explanation given, the giant and the fortress vanish, leaving Thor momentarily mystified, then livid, brimming with impotent fury, as he was without a foe to fell. At number 4 is Loki. Though Loki lived in Asgard and kept company with the Aesir gods, he was a giant by birth, which explains why he's ultimately the linchpin of Asgard's destruction, ushering in the end of the age in which Norse mythology takes place. Unquestionably, Loki was a gifted warrior. His and Heimdall's duel to the death during Ragnarok places this statement beyond dispute. But Loki's true power was of a more insidious nature. Cunning, deceit, and manipulation were his true weapons. Treachery was a part of his being as much as the blood that coursed through his veins. His trickery landed Asgard in countless predicaments, and his guile and cleverness delivered Asgard from nearly as many as he landed it in. A story that exemplifies this turbulent dynamic is the story in which Loki shaved Sif's, Thor's wife's, head. Thor, his wife now bald, got a hold of Loki, but Loki was able to forestall his well-deserved thrashing by promising to find Sif new hair. Loki traveled to the domain of the dwarves, and many events ensued, after which Loki returned with 6 magical marvels, among them Sif's new hair, Thor's hammer, Mjolnir, and Odin's spear, Gungnir. Unfortunately, in the end, during the events that transpire in the mythic future, Loki becomes the ultimate doom and the primary architect of Asgard's and the world's destruction. He tricked the blind god Hoder into killing Balder with a mistletoe projectile, and later, he prevented the other gods from resurrecting Balder, whose death was said to be one of the main events that heralded the coming of Ragnarok. Most heinous of all, though, was Loki's union with Angerboda. By her, he sired 3 children: Hel, an enigmatic figure who is both giantess and goddess, giantess by pedigree and goddess by purview, Jormungander, the world serpent, and the monstrous wolf Fenrir. It was foretold that during Ragnarok, Loki would lead the hordes of Hel against Asgard, that the world serpent and Thor would kill one another, and that Odin was fated to be devoured by Fenrir. Up next, we have Fenrir. Of all the monsters in Norse mythology, Fenrir, a huge and ravenous wolf, was the chief bane of the gods. Born to Loki and the ogress Angerboda, Fenrir was the eldest of their 3 monstrous children. The middle spawn was Jormungander, the Midgard serpent, and the youngest was the goddess Hel, who held dominion over the underworld. Fenrir and his 2 siblings were prophesied to bring much evil and destruction into the world, so Odin sent the gods to seize them and bring them before him. In an effort to preempt all of the death and destruction this trio of monsters would unleash, Odin dealt with each in turn. Jormungander was cast down into the ocean. Hel was cast down to Niflheim, though perhaps this wasn't the wisest decision, for this, inadvertently, gave her great power and put her in a position to cause problems later on. And Fenrir, unlike his 2 siblings, wasn't banished to some remote place. No, the gods decided to raise him themselves in the very halls of Asgard, allowing them to keep a close eye on him. This burden fell mostly to Tyr, the most intrepid of the gods, for only he was bold enough to feed Fenrir. But each day the wolf grew, prodigious in both size and strength, and because he was destined to unleash great evil, the gods decided that he had to be bound. Using their guile, they allayed Fenrir's suspicions by presenting the chains they bound him with as a contest to test his strength. Each time Fenrir broke a chain, a subsequent stronger chain was used, but it soon became clear that no chain they produced could hold him. the gods turned to the dwarves, who crafted a restraint of unconventional make with an appearance that belied how unbreakable it was. Here's the passage from the Prose Edda that describes how it was made. It was constructed from 6 elements: the noise of a cat's footsteps, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the sinews of a bear, the breath of a fish, and the spittle of a bird. This newest restraint was different from the previous ones, soft, smooth, and supple, and more so resembled a ribbon than a chain. Because of the dissimilarity, Fenrir became suspicious, so he wouldn't allow himself to be bound unless one of the gods placed a hand in his mouth. Tyr, the only god bold enough to feed Fenrir, was the one who placed his hand in the wolf's mouth. What happened next played out predictably. Fenrir couldn't break free, the gods wouldn't let him go, and finally, the sequence was punctuated by Fenrir biting off Tyr's hand. The gods then wedged a sword, hilt to point, in the wolf's mouth, and the saliva that poured out created the river Van. Fenrir breaks free of his bonds at the onset of Ragnarok. He charges forward, his lower jaw pressed against the earth, his upper jaw pressed up against the sky, devouring everything in his path. He kills Odin, who is later avenged by his son Vidar when he rips Fenrir's head apart. At number 6 is Jormungander. Also known as the Midgard serpent, Jormungander, meaning mighty snake, was one of 3 monstrous children born of the unholy union between Loki and the ogress Angerboda. Jormungander was cast down into the ocean that encircled Midgard, the realm of humanity, and he grew to such an incredible length that his bulk extended around the whole world, so that he could put the tip of his tail in his own mouth. Following his birth and banishment, Jormungander features almost exclusively as the arch-nemesis of Thor. In the myth in which Thor and Loki journey to the land of the giants, they find their way to Utgard, an enormous fortress in the wilderness. Inside, they're subjected to a series of challenges, at the end of which, Thor is left defeated, having failed each challenge in which he competed. At the end of the story, though, it's revealed to him that the series of challenges was actually a series of deceptions. In one, he couldn't lift a cat off the floor, but as it turned out, the giant cat was actually the world serpent disguised by magic. To Thor's eyes, he lifted the cat so that only one paw left the ground. But in reality, he lifted the Midgard serpent, its entire world-encircling bulk, so high that it almost touched the sky. In another myth, Thor goes fishing. He baits his hook with the head of an ox, and it's Jormungander who takes the bait. Thor was about to strike a mighty blow with his hammer, but his companion, the giant Ymir, cut the line so that the serpent sank back into the depths unharmed. The final encounter between Thor and Jormungander occurs during Ragnarok. Thor strikes down his foe, but his victory is fleeting, for he is covered in such a copious amount of venom during the fight that he drops dead after taking only 9 steps. Up next we have Hel, a giantess by birth and a goddess by power and province. Here's a passage from the Prose Edda to begin this entry. Hel, he, Odin, threw down into Niflheim and made her ruler over 9 worlds. She has the power to dole out lodging and provisions to those who are sent to her, and they are the people who have died of disease or old age. She has there an enormous dwelling, with walls of immense height and huge gates. Her hall is called Eljudnir, sprayed with snowstorms. Her dish is hunger, her knife is famine, her slave is lazy, and slothful is her woman servant. The threshold over which people enter is a pitfall called Falandafarad, falling to peril, and her bed is named Kor, sickbed, and her bed curtains are named Blikyandabul, gleaming disaster. She is half black and half a lighter flesh color and is easily recognized. Mostly she is gloomy and cruel. Hel's own contribution to the defeat of the gods and the destruction of the world is more subtle than that of her 2 siblings. Rather than fight against the gods directly, the part she plays is in the events leading up to Ragnarok, in disrupting the efforts of the gods to prevent the great cataclysm from coming to pass. After Loki tricks the blind god Hodor into inadvertently killing Balder with a mistletoe projectile, Odin is most deeply affected by this death, not just because Balder was his son, but because he alone knew that Balder's death was one of the main events that heralded the coming of Ragnarok. With Balder dead, Odin knew that Ragnarok, all of the chaos and calamity entailed with it, would not be long in coming. Hermod, either a son or servant of Odin, galloped for 9 days and 9 nights through the deep and dark places of the world. Finally, enduring shadow and peril throughout this journey, he came upon the river Gjoll, continuing on to the Gjoll Bridge. He then rode to the Hall of Hel, and inside he saw Balder, seated in a place of honor. Hermod beseeched Hel to allow Balder to ride back to Asgard with him, that this would lighten the hearts of the Aesir gods, all of whom were in the depths of sorrow. Hel replied that she would allow Balder to return to the land of the living if everything in all the world, both living and dead, wept for him, that if anyone or anything spoke against him or didn't shed tears, Balder would remain as he was, trapped in her domain. Hermod returned to Asgard and relayed what he was told, thus beginning a frantic effort in which the gods sent messengers around the world, supplicating everyone and everything to weep for Balder. In this they came tantalizingly close, but unfortunately, there was one person who would not weep, Thok, a giantess who was found sitting in a cave. 2 comments on this. First, Balder remained dead because Thok would not weep, meaning Ragnarok would not be forestalled by the resurrection of Balder. And second, the gods came to believe that Thok was none other than Loki in disguise. At number 8 is Surtur. Come Ragnarok, everything that can go wrong goes wrong. 2 giant wolves devour the sun and moon. A huge snake spits so much venom into the sky that the stars go dark. Earthquakes shake the land, even the world tree. Another huge wolf charges forward, lower jaw against the ground, upper jaw pressed up against the sky, and consumes everything in its path. And Surtur, his fiery forces in tow, appears to engulf the world in flame. Amid the din and upheaval of the world being unmade, the sky splits open, and through the fiery gash of a portal come riding the warriors of Muspelheim. Surtur, leading his forces, is the first to emerge. He brandishes his flaming sword over his head, and fire radiates from him in every direction, scorching the land. All the armies and monsters poised to assail Asgard muster just past the Rainbow Bridge, which shatters after their crossing. Surtur and Freyr meet on the battlefield in single combat, but Freyr, because he gave away his good sword, will be cut down. Wrapping up our list is Hrym. Not much is said of Hrym, a frost giant, as he only briefly features in the cataclysmic events of Ragnarok. To discuss Hrym, we have to discuss the Naglfar, a ship fashioned from the unclipped toenails of the dead, that's destined to sail against Asgard when the last battle comes. This is why people trim the toenails of the deceased. Each foot tended to in this way was thought to delay the construction of the Naglfar by denying it a pinch of trimmings. When the Midgard serpent maneuvers its colossal bulk and advances on Asgard, the ocean will flood the land, and it is then the Naglfar, that dreaded ship, will loosen from its moorings. It will be captained by Hrym, who will lead the frost giants against Asgard, as Loki will lead the horde of undead, and as Surtur will lead the fire giants. And that's it for this video. If you enjoy the content, please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.